Talia Kwartler is a PhD candidate in the history of art at University College London, where she is completing her dissertation titled Suzanne Duchamp does more intelligent things than paint. Between 2013 and 2018, she worked at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, collaborating on the exhibitions Francis Picabia, Our Heads Are Round, So Our Thoughts Can Change Direction, 2016-2017, and Max Ernst, Beyond Painting, 2017-2018. Kwartler holds a bachelor's degree in art and archaeology with a certificate in Italian language and culture from Princeton University, and a master's degree in the history of art and visual culture from the University of Oxford.
Merci Elvan pour l'introduction et merci Deborah de me donner l'occasion de parler ici aujourd'hui. J'ai eu le privilège de rencontrer Deborah en février quand elle a fait une belle présentation sur Paul Neagu à une conférence que j'ai organisée à University College London sur la relation entre la pédagogie et l'histoire de l'art. Je suis très heureuse de pouvoir contribuer à ce programme très intéressant sur les femmes artistes enseignantes au XXe siècle. Je suis arrivée au sujet de ma présentation, la relation entre la pédagogie artistique de Sophie Taeuber, la pédagogie de la danse de Rudolf von Leben et la situation dadaïste à Zurich entre les années 1915 et 1920 par ma recherche doctorale sur la dadaïste française Suzanne Duchamp. Merci encore, Deborah, pour cette invitation qui m'a permis d'explorer la figure de Taeuber dans plus de détails. Je voudrais aussi dire qu'à cause du confinement à Londres, je n'ai pas pu me rendre à Zurich pour faire toute la recherche que j'aurais voulu présenter. Mais j'ai la chance d'avoir l'aide d'Anne Omland, conservatrice à MoMA à New York, et sa collègue Laura Breverman, qui travaillent ensemble avec le Burger Club et le Kunstmuseum Basel et la Tate sur une grande rétrospective de Taeuber qui ouvrira l'année prochaine. Cette présentation n'est vraiment possible que grâce à l'aide d'Anne et Laura. En particulier, les détails de la chronologie que je présente ici viennent de celle que Laura et Rebecca ont préparée pour le catalogue de la rétrospective. Aussi, Rolf Wurzensberger, l'archiviste des archives à l'Université de Zurich, m'a beaucoup aidé dans ma recherche en m'envoyant les précieux matériels sur le travail pédagogique de Sophie Taeuber. Je vais maintenant continuer en anglais avec le screen et je serai ravie de répondre à vos questions après la présentation.
In order to better understand women artists of the 20th century avant-gardes, we need to look at them not merely in the context of standard narratives of art history, but in relationship to the multiple cultures within which they were simultaneously living, collaborating, and making art. As an interdisciplinary artist based in Zurich, working as an arts teacher, a dancer, and a Dadaist, Sophie Taeuber is a prime artist to consider through this approach. I refer to Taeuber deliberately by her family name from here onwards because she did not marry her husband, Jean Arp, until October 1922, so that is how she would have been known in the period that I discuss. As an artist who was also a teacher, Taeuber is one of a number of women artists across the 20th century, working as a teacher as well as an artist in their own right, from Annie Albers to Faith Ringgold to Amy Sillman, to name but a few other women artist teachers of the 20th century. Even so, Taeuber was the only woman Dadaist in Zurich who was also working as a teacher at the same time. Beginning in May 1916, Taeuber taught design and embroidery at the Applied Arts Department of Zurich's trade school, instructing students how to work with media that were central to her own development of abstract forms. Taeuber would teach these disciplines with a few pauses until March 1929. What is of particular interest to me is the fact that even though there are records of Taeuber's pedagogical work, the documents detailing her teaching during the years of Dada in Zurich are not substantial. In this regard, there remains much to be considered about the relationship between her teaching, her dancing, and her artistic production between the years 1915 and 1920. In 1915, the year before Taeuber had begun teaching in Zurich, she had started to study an entirely different media. Taeuber first attended the Laban School of the Art of Movement in Zurich in the summer of 1915, where she would meet dancers Mary Wigman, Katja Wolf, Suzanne Perrotet, and Maya Khrushchev. All of these dancers would later perform at either the Cabaret Voltaire or the Gallery Dada. Taeuber explored Laban's technique in greater depth in 1917 at the Artist Commune Monte Verita in Ascona with a group of dancers that included Wigman and Perrotet. That same year, Taeuber led an evening program organized by the Laban School at Zurich's Koflutenhall. As part of the Laban School of Movement, Taeuber was simultaneously a student, a performer, and a teacher. While there has been more scholarship recently on Taeuber's work as a dancer, particularly by Christine Massel and Emma Levania in their exhibition Danser sa vie from 2011, and by Nell Andrew in her new book Moving Modernism, published this year, there has still not been substantive research on Taeuber's pedagogical work in the Applied Arts Department of Zurich's Trade School, and there remains work to be done on the interrelationship between Taeuber's work as a teacher and dancer during the years of Dada in Zurich. I am sure that we will soon learn much more from the extensive research that Anne Umland, Walburga Krupp, and Laura Braverman at MoMA, Eva Reifert at the Kunstmuseum Basel, and Natalia Sidlina at Tate have undertaken in preparation for their forthcoming retrospective Sophie Taeuber Arp Living Abstraction. The context that I am sure the exhibition will provide will lead to a far greater understanding about Taeuber's interdisciplinary work as an abstract artist. Today, I will address this gap by exploring Taeuber's work as a teacher and student in Zurich between the years 1915 and 1920, at which point the center of Dada had moved to Paris. This makes it possible to consider the ways that both dance and textile arts were central parts of Taeuber's Dadaist production. Taeuber used woven textiles and beaded embroideries to push her visual subjects towards abstraction, while bringing the languages of dance and the applied arts into the realm of fine art. Taeuber's artwork stands as an important point of connection between Laban and the Zurich Dadaists. Even though Taeuber was studying with Laban, her body of work begs the question, who was really teaching whom? Weaving these threads together, we can better explore Taeuber's engagement with pedagogy across media. Doing so allows for a clearer understanding of how her different identities as an artist, teacher, and a student all contributed to her singular vision of Dada. A photograph by an unknown photographer captures Taeuber dancing in an elaborate costume designed by her partner Arp. While involved with the Dada group in Zurich, Taeuber was both a teacher and a student, a practitioner of the applied arts, and a member of the burgeoning avant-garde. When Taeuber danced at Dada performances and exhibitions, she often used a pseudonym so as not to alarm her colleagues in the Applied Arts Department of Zurich's Trade School. Writing of Taeuber's dance, The Song of Flying Fish and Seahorses, Hugo Ball would later describe a dance full of points and fishbones, full of flickering sunshine and glare and a piercing acuity. The lines shatter on her body. Every gesture is subdivided 100 times, sharp, bright, pointed. Ball's writing draws a parallel to how Taeuber's geometries operate in her contemporaneous visual artworks. In Composition verticale horizontale à éléments d'objet from 1919, squares of paint and cutout paper dance across a pictorial surface of shimmering gold gouache. Taeuber's abstract forms interact fluidly within her artwork, a lesson she would have absorbed from both her work as a teacher of textile art and as a student of dance. The Dada Circle in Zurich centered around the Cabaret Voltaire, a performance venue founded in February 1916 by Hugo Ball and Emmy Hennings, and later the Gallery Dada. It was at the Cabaret Voltaire that Taeuber first performed with the Dadaists, including Tristan Tzara, Marcel Janko, and Art. Between 1918 and 19, Francis Picabia and Gabrielle Buffet, his wife, were also in Switzerland, and they would travel to Zurich in early 1919. Buffet would later write an important early posthumous essay on Taeuber's work that evocatively described this period. Notably, Taeuber was the only woman Dadaist who was also working as a teacher. Even though the anarchic and irreverent activities of the Dada group in Zurich would seem at odds with a pedagogical practice, Taeuber found a distinct way to merge them through her art. During this period, Taeuber collaborated with Arp on various projects. In particular, he designed the patterned costume and mask that Taeuber activated through dance. At the same time, the couple also worked together on a group of artworks known as duo collages. One of these was the untitled textile work known today as Pathetic Symmetry, dated to 1916-17. Art made the design that Taeuber rendered as an embroidered textile. It was clearly Taeuber's knowledge of textile, embroidery, and beadwork that made these duo collages possible. They stand as a striking example of how Taeuber integrated her identities as a teacher and a Dadaist. From May 1916 until 1929, Taeuber taught design and embroidery at the Applied Arts Department of Zurich's trade school. Her teaching in the applied arts was interconnected to her work in the fine arts. For example, in November 1918, her work was shown in the exhibition of the Artists Association Das Neue Leben at the Kunsthalle Basel, alongside works by an international group of avant-garde artists. Taeuber showed works in the applied arts in this show, and it was an exhibition that rejected hierarchies between artistic disciplines. Taeuber showed with this group again in January 1919 and January 1920 with works including a beaded necklace and pillows like those shown here. As you can see here in the timetable for the Applied Arts Department, Taeuber taught alongside a number of other teachers, including Alice Fry, G. Meyer, Bertha Barr, and G. Rouet. These are some of the photographs from the archives of the Zurich University of the Arts that record the work of Taeuber's students. You can see the different kinds of textile arts that Taeuber students were producing, from a cloth embroidered with a border of flora and fauna and an innately beaded box to abstract designs on lace and ornamental borders for fabric. Here we are looking now at two reproductions of Taeuber's works, an embroidered pillow and a beaded purse, in relationship to reproductions of works of the same media by her students Jenny Wilder and Lucy Terrell Welty. While there remains much research to be done on this dialogue between Taeuber and her students, for our purposes today, I want to focus on one aspect of this pedagogical interplay. This quartet of artworks emphasizes that while Taeuber was working as a teacher of embroidery and beadwork, she was using those exact same media to inform her abstract work that was shown in more fine art contexts. During the Dada period and beyond, Taeuber existed between different worlds as she worked simultaneously as a teacher and an avant-garde artist. It was only after Taeuber's Dada period that she would publish two pedagogical texts. The first was Remarks on Instruction in Ornamental Design, and it was published in December 1922 in a Teachers Association journal. There, Taeuber wrote, "Always distinguish between the essential and the inessential. The object and its purpose are a primary thing. Give the object a simple and functional form. Ornament must in every case be subordinate to form. Try to comprehend the nature of the material." Taeuber's second pedagogical text was a manual for drawing instruction for female textile students and teachers that she co-authored with Blanche Gauchat, a fellow teacher in the Applied Arts Department of Zurich's trade school, which was published in 1927. Here, we are looking at reproductions of 4 of the page spreads of diagrammatic teaching exercises that accompanied the text. They were intended as suggestions for further work, to increase students' expressive abilities in form and color, as different as their innate talents may be. Chronologically speaking, these pedagogical writings are outside the scope of this paper that focuses specifically on the period between 1915 and 1920, when Taeuber was collaborating with the Dadaists in Zurich while working as a teacher of the applied arts. Even so, we will come back to these writings later in order to consider them in relationship to pedagogical materials by Taeuber's own teacher, Rudolf von Laban. As I noted at the beginning of my paper, Taeuber studied at the Laban School of Dance in Zurich before performing and collaborating with the Dadaists. Gabrielle Buffet would later describe how elle suit l'école de danse expressionniste de Laban, dont elle est l'une des meilleures élèves, et se découvre un sens de rythme aussi réel dans le temps que dans l'espace. Marcel and Levin would later describe how Laban incarne la nouvelle figure du danseur à la fois pédagogue et théoricien. Laban's methodology focused on the idea that movement offered dancers a way to heighten their physical sensitivity, and it emphasized the power of the body within choreographed forms. Through physical sensation and improvisation, Laban encouraged dancers to reconfigure common movements and dance patterns to achieve their own dance sense. While there is not a substantive record of Laban's precise activities in Zurich, Taeuber's involvement with both Dada and the Laban School of Dance reveals that she was a key point of connection between these worlds. Naima Privats has argued that Taeuber brought to the dance classes her own comparable artistic search for basic forms and structures. Even though Laban never performed with the Dadaists, he was known to have been a regular visitor to the Cabaret Voltaire. Laban developed an abstract language for dance that he disseminated in his diagrammatic system known as Laban notation. Laban had begun developing his system of dance notation in Zurich while Taeuber was developing her own singular vision of abstraction across media at the same time. Notably, Laban only published his first book, Die Welt der Tänzer, in 1920, after his exposure to the Cabaret Voltaire and the Galerie Dada. Privats has argued that in the absence of concrete evidence about Laban's involvement with the Dadaists, this chronology emphasizes the importance of Dada to the development of his ideas. It was only later in the 1920s, after Laban had returned to his native Germany from Switzerland, that he would publish his theories and diagrammatic systems for teaching dance. Here, for example, we see a photograph of Laban in front of a large dance diagram, as well as an illustration published in Laban's choreography from 1926. In the illustration, a schematic dancer's limbs are rendered as moving between various number points that indicate directional movements. The year after Taeuber published her manual for drawing instruction for female textile students, Laban published a more substantial corpus of dance diagrams, such as script dancing from 1928. Laban's dance notations for schrift dance, published nearly 10 years later, can be read as a response to the visual relationships between forms within Taeuber's abstract compositions. In the face of uncertainties about Taeuber's and Laban's pedagogical relationship, we can take their artwork and writings as their own kind of evidence. The proximity of the teaching diagrams reveals the connection between Taeuber's and Laban's pedagogy across media. It emphasizes that the teaching, particularly regarding the language and nature of abstraction, was clearly going in both directions. By way of conclusion, I want to return to Buffet, who would later describe how dance was one of the all-encompassing means through which Taeuber arrived at abstraction. For Buffet, Taeuber's art existed en du même mystérieux du même ordre que nous percevons sans pouvoir le formuler, et il se trouve peut-être la seule réelle raison d'être, la clé du mystère de toute invention artistique. That ability to perceive and see without knowing the formula came as much from Taeuber's intuitive understanding of the interwoven iteration of textile patterns as from her own dance sense. In Taeuber's data work, there is a clear flow between media and artistic identities, a reminder that she was a key intermediary between the worlds of teaching, dance, and Dada. Taeuber's simultaneous work as a teacher of the applied arts, a student of dance, and as a Dadaist artist emphasizes the multiple circles in Zurich within which she operated. Her art also illustrates the manner in which her pedagogical work made her distinct within the circle of Zurich Dadaists. The research I shared today offers a new way of thinking about Taeuber's work that is an example of an expanded way of studying women artists and women artists as teachers. Considering interdisciplinary artists like Taeuber through this lens, as well as subsequent generations of artist teachers working in media from the fine arts and the applied arts to dance and film, can lead to a new way of interpreting the 20th century avant-gardes in a broader sense. Thank you.
So thank you so much. It was really great. I have to see if there are like any questions. I don't know how it works. Thank you. Okay, there is one. Maybe I see the question, so I can. So thank you. There's one question. So I'm reading the question to you. So thank you so much for such an interesting talk, and it's from Marcia. I'm curious about Taeuber's students. Were they just women? Were they artists? Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yes, so thank you so much for that question, Marcia. It's a really good and relevant one. So as I showed in the images of the works that were by Taeuber's students, we do know who some of them are, and some of them were, most of them I think were women. Some of them were also kind of had careers in the applied arts. I can't actually tell you so much about them because there was a large number of them, and that's actually an area of research that I think would be really interesting to explore further. And again, as I was saying, there is still a lot to be made kind of this connection between Taeuber's work as a teacher and kind of the works her students made. So there are records of them in the archives and collection of the Zurich University of the Arts. And so that's a question I would say definitely to explore further. I would say they are more often they are more often women, and specifically the 1927 text was a text specifically for women students and teachers. So I hope that answered your question a little bit.
So there is another question. Does your lecture imply that there could be a link between art production and crafting activities, abstraction and transmission? And it's from Mariana.
Thank you so much, Mariana. It's another excellent question. I would say that Sophie Taeuber's work does imply that there is certainly a connection between kind of art production and what you might call crafting activities, as well as there being a relationship between kind of abstraction and the transmission of knowledge. I think what's really interesting in the case of Taeuber is that there's not as much a distinction between her work in the applied arts and fine arts, or her work in kind of a more architectural sense, that she is first and foremost an artist, and it's kind of I think it's important to understand her work across mediums more than kind of separating it into her, all these different parts. I mean, in a way, I separated out what she did as a teacher and as a dancer and as a Dadaist as a way to emphasize that all these parts are really quite interrelated, and specifically in terms of how she arrived at a language of abstraction. I think that it's important to take all of these points into consideration at once.
Thanks you for your reply. So there are two more questions, Talia. So I will maybe it would be great if you could answer to those, and then after we will have to stop. So there's one question from Hasna. So she says, thank you so much, so interesting, but I want to ask about the style she used, especially in embroidery, and how it's somehow organized and neat in comparing them with Dada concept. So this is one of the questions. And the second question from Claire is, thank you very much. You talked about Taeuber's path towards abstraction through her teaching and her publication. Was this publication directly addressed to her students or addressed to a larger public? Could you repeat the title, please? And can you precise her treatment of abstraction in this book? So it's quite long questions. So maybe you can see if you choose the length of your reply.
All right, Claire, it sounds like you have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to try to answer a few of them concisely for the sake of time. So the publications, I think they were directed both to her students, but also, this is another point to explore, to her students, but also to teachers, but also to kind of a wider group of teachers who were working in these fields of the applied arts. The title is quite long, and I don't kind of have it at hand, but it was a teaching manual. So it was really meant, this 1927 text was very much a teaching manual. The 1922 text is a little bit more kind of Sophie's ideas behind ornamentation and these things. I do want to come to the other question, which, if I've understood correctly, is kind of about the so-called neatness of Taeuber's abstractions in relationship to the other Dadaists. And I think the point that I would really draw out, and it again connects to Taeuber's work in textile arts and also embroidery and also beadwork, is that even though there's many different kinds of works of art by Dadaists, and they're not always messy, so to speak. One of the elements that interested a number of Dada artists, and specifically Jean Arp and Taeuber, was kind of this idea of chance. So Arp, for example, was making kind of chance arrangements of geometries, objects arranged according to chance. And so I see Taeuber's abstract works of art that maybe seem neat actually as operating as part of a more kind of intuitive playing with geometries and playing with forms. And I do think as well that what she would have known from her work as a teacher, where there's a way that kind of forms and patterns in textiles iterate, that she would have picked things up from that, as well as from her work as a dancer, where improvisation was really important. So I think just because something seems neat, there's actually sometimes a bit more orderly messiness behind it.
So Talia, there's like, time is running, of course, but there's like one more question.
Okay.
And I can read it to you. It's from Karine, and she says, thank you so much for this interesting presentation. And I'm not sure I got it properly. Would you say that because Taeuber was also a teacher while being a student of Laban, it may have parallels between Taeuber's pedagogy and Laban's pedagogy? So it's a very long question. So maybe you can see how, because we have 4 minutes left.
Well, Karine, I think it's an excellent question. And it's one that I would say this presentation is the so-called tip of the iceberg. Because there is really that question of, there still is that question of kind of how much was being shared between Taeuber and Laban. And so Taeuber, I would say, is an extremely important point of connection between these worlds of Dada and between the Laban School of Dance. And I think what's interesting, and the point I was trying to make in showing those diagrams side by side at the end, is that both Taeuber and Laban don't actually publish manuals on either their dance notation or on their work in the applied arts until
almost a decade after their kind of engagement with Dada, albeit in very different ways in Zurich. And it's interesting to me, the fact that Laban, even though he was developing a dance notation, a system for Laban notation while in Zurich, he doesn't actually write it down until much later. And so I really think there's more of an influence on Dada, on Laban's theories and pedagogy than's often discussed. And I also think that Taeuber, she was a student of Laban, but she also developed her own dances with this Laban notation. So I'm trying to get at the idea that there's more of an interplay between Taeuber and Laban than has often been discussed. There has been research done on this engagement between Laban and the Dadaists. I think Taeuber's specific role in that dialogue is one that I hope to draw out further.
Thank you so much, Talia. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Perfect timing. So
perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I hope we can meet one day in real, but
yes.